its latest example of troubling unrest. Recently, as some of you know, also thousands of pro-fascist youth rioted in the center of Moscow, attacking individuals of all ages from Caucasus and Central Asia. As I said, today we have exceptional individuals who will help us understand both the theoretical and practical experience of the Russian political landscape and look at the issue of reporting. They've looked at this over a number of decades and written extensively, as well as helped to inform us, not only in Hudson, but in Washington community generally. Andrei Piankovsky is a visiting fellow here at Hudson, has been here with us many years. He is a well-known Russian analyst. He has contributed regularly to such publications as the Moscow Times, and I may pronounce this wrong, Novaya Gazeta, is that right? He's an applied mathematician by training, but Andrei is the author of several best-selling books on the Putin presidency in Russia, including his most recent work from the Hudson Institute, Another Look into Putin's Soul. I want to welcome him back, and it's great to see him, as always, a friend of the Institute. David Satter is a foreign Moscow correspondent, is a long observer of Russia and the former Soviet Union. He's a senior fellow at Hudson Institute and a fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute of Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. David has written 4 books about Russia: Age of Delirium, The Decline and Fall of the Soviet Union, 1996, Darkness at Dawn, The Rise of the Russian Criminal State. His latest book, Haunted Ground, Russia and the Communist Past, was due out in November this year, I think. His books have been translated into Russian, Estonian, Latvian, Czech, Portuguese, and Vietnamese. Age of Delirium is also being made into a documentary film as a joint project of U.S., German, and Ukrainian production. David has agreed to go first, and he will be followed by Andrei, and then they'll open up for questions. I will get out of the way and not eat any more of their time, and leave them to moderate the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. David, давай more informal.
Okay. Ладно, all right. For those of you who don't speak Russian, we'll decide to speak seated. Thanks, John. The attack on the arrivals hall at Domodedovo, of course, was an event of an extremely ominous character for anyone who flies into Russia regularly. We all know the arrivals hall. We all can perfectly picture the scene there. And it's a reminder of just how vulnerable Russia is and how vulnerable the people who spend time in Russia are, because after all, it's one environment and we're all affected. There were a number of aspects of this tragedy that struck me. One of the things that that shocked me, although it in no way surprised me, was the fact that after the explosion, with the bodies of the victims literally all over the area, including many of the cab drivers who'd been waiting for incoming passengers, those cab drivers who had survived began jacking up the price for a trip to Moscow, demanding as much as 20,000 rubles, which is roughly $700, in order to take shell-shocked passengers back to Moscow. That kind of cynicism and total disregard for the tragedy which affected people who were in exactly the same position as they were is unfortunately not an accident. Waiting passengers were also led through the area which was still filled with smoke and littered with body parts. Were led out through the scene of the tragedy. There were no alternative arrangements made. Now, it should be said in fairness that the express train from Domodedovo to Moscow began transporting people free of charge. But nonetheless, those other reactions were something that ought to be taken note of, because preventing terrorism is also the effort of an entire society, and it reflects, and it has to be supported by a specific mentality, and that mentality is largely absent in Russia. In fact, I think what we have in Russia today is a situation in which a terrorist threat has been created in the North Caucasus, where it did not exist before, does not have to exist, and is getting worse with every passing year. Boris Nemtsov cited the figures for terrorist acts since Putin came to power as a result of an act of terrorism, and promised to destroy the terrorists in their toilets, and, as Andreas pointed out, to prevent them from attacking the airports. In that year, 2000, there were something like 130 terrorist acts. This year, there were 750. So Putin's efforts to destroy the terrorists, and every time there is an attack, we're presented with another blood-curdling threat. We'll destroy them in their sewers, we'll destroy them, we'll wipe them out, none of which, of course, has the slightest effect on reducing the terrorist threat to Russia. But the roots of the problem and the full tragedy of which of what is happening, and the threat which may affect not just Russians and not just people who are visiting Russia, but ultimately the whole world, is the fact that the Muslim population of the Soviet Union was very secular before the Soviet Union broke up. There was not, even afterwards, during the long years of the Chechen independence struggle, the religious extremism and kind of apocalyptic terrorism of the type that we're seeing now was not typical. In the early years of the Chechen War, Chechen commanders actually escorted Russian mothers to the camps where they held their sons prisoner, and allowed them to take their sons, who were in many cases conscripts with little understanding of why this war was even being fought, and to return home with them. The atmosphere in 1994, when this began, was completely different than what exists today. At that time, shortly before the first invasion of Chechnya, Yeltsin signaled that it was time to negotiate all of the claims of the Chechen separatists and to find a solution. Shortly afterward, there was an attempt on the life of Jofer Dudayev, the separatist president of Chechnya. And it transpired that, in fact, this announcement had not been made because there was a serious desire to negotiate a solution which, by the way, would have been relatively easy. The Chechens were not demanding anything significantly different than what the Russians had already granted in the case of Tatarstan. But the offer of negotiations, in fact, was clearly intended to induce the Chechen leadership to put down their guard, to make it easier to kill Dudayev. When the invasion took place in December, Pavel Grachov, who was at the time the defense minister, said that it would take a half an hour for a single battalion to take command of Grozny. What happened was that unprepared Russian troops were massacred on the streets of Grozny. The units that were sent in without navigation equipment, without maps, without preparation, without training, without any real understanding of why they were there, were trapped in the streets of Grozny by very well-equipped Chechen fighters and simply annihilated. What happened afterward, in a in what could be seen as an act of revenge, was literally the carpet bombing of an inhabited city. Many of the ethnic Chechens who had relatives in the countryside were able to evacuate Grozny. For the most part, or to a great extent, the people who were left in the city center, which began to be obliterated from the air and with mortars, were ethnic Russians. It's believed that of course, it's difficult in the case of such an event to get precise figures on the number of people killed. But the best estimates are that in 5 weeks of carpet bombing of the city, bombing that reduced Grozny to something resembling Stalingrad or Berlin after the Second World War, 20,000 people died. Those who survived by hiding in basements and just praying that they wouldn't be victims of a direct hit. The military prowess of the Chechen resistance, the disorganization and corruption of the Russian army, and the impending election were all factors in the peace settlement in Khasavurt in 1996 or 1995, which resulted in the 3 years of independence for Chechnya. Years of independence which were badly misused both by the Russians and the Chechens. I mean, Chechnya became a no-go zone in which anyone who entered from the outside was likely to be kidnapped and held for ransom. The largest share of the kidnappings, however, took place within Chechnya itself. Most of the people being held for ransom in what became Chechnya's biggest business were actually well-to-do or relatively well-to-do Chechens, not outsiders. But there were cases of Russian military commanders making deals with Chechen kidnappers to kidnap their own recruits. The level of cynicism and criminality that emanated out from this unnecessary war was simply phenomenal. And it did not become better as a result of the Second Chechen War, which was initiated by a series of still unexplained apartment bombings in Moscow. Now, both Andrei and I have written extensively on the Moscow apartment or the Russian apartment bombings. I won't go into great detail about them, except to say that there were 4 bombings. The 300 people were killed as they slept in their beds. The bombings were blamed on Chechens. A 5th bomb was discovered in a basement in Ryazan. That bomb did not go off. It consisted of hexagon, the same high explosive that was used in the 4 other bombs, but a dragnet in the city of Ryazan caught the people who put the bomb in the basement of the building in Ryazan. They turned out to be not Chechen terrorists, but agents of the FSB. To this day, the apartment bombings have not been adequately investigated. I have little doubt that they were a provocation intended to provide an excuse for the Second Chechen War, which proved to be in many ways more devastating than the First War. But it led ultimately, it involved the use of weapons not previously used in the First War. An escalation of atrocities which in fact were plentiful in the First War. A scorched earth policy in many parts of Chechnya, and inevitably it deeply embittered the Chechens, who lost completely the sense that they had once been citizens of the same country with Russians and had something in common with them. During the period of Chechnya's independence, Wahhabis began to appear in large numbers. Well, not large numbers. They began to appear in Chechnya. But they were largely attractive, and their ideology was largely attractive to organized crime. The Wahhabi ideology was an ideal mobilizing device for criminal groups, and the Wahhabis as a whole had actually, despite all of the propaganda about Chechen participation with Al-Qaeda and the war of terror, did not enjoy wide popularity in Chechnya. In fact, the mentality of the groups is completely different. In Chechen, there's nothing in Chechen tradition that justifies sending women out as suicide bombers. A, because they're women, and two, because Chechens have a heroic tradition, and their goal is to defeat the enemy and survive, and it always was. And that was the case during the 19th century when they fought against the Russian Empire. In any case, an exhausted country and a devastated country was finally suppressed by the superior material and military resources of Russia, and the fact that part of the Chechen resistance was bought off and became the recipient of unlimited funds. A lot of the killing then that had been taking place by the Russian security forces began to be assumed by the new Chechen government under Ramzan Kadyrov. I think Amnesty International or Memorial estimates that there were somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 abductions and summary executions in Chechnya between 1999 and 2009. Well, about half of those probably are attributable directly to the Chechen security forces. In any case, calm was restored to Chechnya. There are indications, and it's an entire separate subject, that the Russian FSB and security forces actually colluded in many situations with the extremists, including the Islamic extremists, against those moderate forces in Chechnya that were interested only in separating from Russia under conditions that would have resembled in effect a confederation. The goals that they established for themselves were always very limited because the physical and material possibilities of Chechnya as an independent country were very limited, as an objective analysis of the situation would have made clear, had it been decided on objective grounds. But once the separatist movement was thoroughly suppressed, and a criminal regime was put in place in Chechnya, which was given carte blanche by the Russians, this regime under Kadyrov, the growing forces of Islamic radicalism in Chechnya began to become predominant, and Doka Umarov, who was at one time one of the lieutenants of Aslan Maskhadov, the former and elected president of Chechnya, and who had at various times with Maskhadov rejected terrorism, announced a new goal, which was the establishment not of Chechen independence, but of an Islamic emirate embracing all of the North Caucasus. And that also marked the decisive embracing of a strategy of terror, which led to the events at the Domodedovo airport. So the question now is, under these circumstances, is there anything that can be done to reverse this seemingly inexorable and sinister process? Well, at this point, there are some people who say it's too late to reverse it, and there's too late to do anything else. One thing is absolutely certain, that the corruption and brutality of the Russian government is no match for the terrorist threat that that it called up and which it now faces. And it will therefore be necessary to, under any circumstances, find a way to make contact with the populations of the North Caucasus. A contact on a human level which has been lost as a result of the Russian policy of placing criminal leaders in the North Caucasus in the hope that they can control the situation with the help of abductions and summary executions, which has led to nothing but an even larger terrorist threat. So it is under these circumstances that the United States is obliged, I think, not to buy into the Russian version of the threat of terrorism and the common U.S.-Russian interest in defeating it, without putting some pressure on the Russian government to examine the roots of the terrorism that has appeared, and to adopt new ways of dealing with it. Andrea,
Thank you. John, David set a tone for discussion. No, what about state of Russian democracy, by the way? Chechnya, Caucasus, terrorism. And I think that he is absolutely right. The state of Russian democracy is so deplorable after the Medvedev attack and before the Medvedev attack that maybe it deserves only mentioning question-answering session. The issues of Caucasus and terrorism in Russia are much more important than state of Russian democracy, because these issues are about the existence of a Russian state. John mentioned the name of my first book written in Hudson Institute, Another Look into Putin's Soul. So I attempted in this book the job of personal Putin psychoanalyst. I think I was more efficient in this role than George W. Bush. Well, I want to continue this exercise now, because after Domodedovo attack, Putin, being evidently under stress and duress, made three very astonishing statements. Very astonishing and very revealing the nature of our power, the understanding of nature of the war Russia is at, and let's try to make three more looks into Putin's soul. His first statement was, "We never will talk with terrorists. We are proud nation, proud leadership. We will never talk to terrorists." Well, maybe he forgot that at least for the latest 6 years, nobody is soliciting to talk with him. This statement demonstrated that he does not understand the nature of modern terrorism. And David touched this issue, because in 20th century, we were fighting with Chechen separatists. And sometimes they use terror as an instrument. And each time making terror act, like terrorists in IRA in Ireland, Basque, in Spanian, Tamils in Sri Lanka, each time they presented some demands. If you will not do this or that, will not withdraw your troops, free some prisoners, will repeat these attacks, and so on. But the terrorism which we face now is quite different. It's Al-Qaeda type terrorist of Islamic Jihad. Islamic Jihad, when people who, Saudi Arabia, who blown Americans' towers, they didn't present you any demands. And people who brought up Domodedovo certainly didn't present any demands also, because these gentlemen, they are just deny the right of our Western decadent, godless civilization to exist. And they will do everything to destroy this civilization and to establish so-called the world caliphate. But world caliphate is a very long-term objective. This is the analogy of communism. So in practice, they just kill us without presenting any demands, because in their view, we don't deserve to be presented with any demand. And such stupid statement on the 6th year of war with militant Islamist terrorism demonstrate to nation and to the world that our commander-in-chief just don't understand the nature of the war in which he is a leader of the nation. The second statement is even more revealing. It was even not statement, it was immediate reaction. His immediate reaction, well, it's not Chechen. It's not Chechen. He didn't know anything, any evidence of investigation. His reaction was, it was his defensive reaction. It's not Chechens. On two reasons. Reason number one, because, by the way, it's a very rare case, but that I agree with Putin. Most probably, I think 99% that it's not Chechen, because jihad, as David told you, is spread all over northern Caucasus. Why he is so adamant to convince us that it's not Chechens? Because all his mythology of his power, the Putin's project, all based on this his promise in 1999 to protect motherland Russia from the Chechen separatists. It's the one reason, just lying on the surface. But there is another, more deep and more sinister for Russia reason. Which, what happened during this 15 years of Chechen war? Initially under Yeltsin, and then first year under Putin, it was classical war with separatists, and we lost this war. We lost this war to Mr. Kadyrov, now leader of 10,000 militants, and 95% of his army are former rebels who have been fighting with Russia. And we not only lost war, we are paying to Mr. Kadyrov huge war operation in the form of state budget transfer. And it's not the end of the story, because the same situation established itself in other Northern Caucasus republics. We paying the corrupt leaders of this republic huge money, and in return they demonstrate formal loyalty to Kremlin, but doing everything possible in the republic. They are stealing this money. There is no economy, and there is all ingredients of this Islamic jihad: demographic explosion, youth unemployment, absolute corruption of secular power, and a lot of people are just fanatically follow the ideas of jihad. They have ideologies, they have structure of horizontal networks, they have experience, they have brand, and they also and they also feel themselves have a feeling of winners over Russia in this already not Chechen but all Caucasian war. And organizers mentioned in this announcement another event, not only the Madridov attack, but riots of pro-fascist youth, thousands of pro-fascist youth in Moscow. I don't want to justify this youngsters, 5,000 of youngsters rioting in Moscow in the center of the city. Some of them doing terrible things. They're beating all people with dark skin. They are making gestures of German Nazis ritual, but I try to explain their if not their behavior, but their mentality. It's a real problem because a lot of these young people from Northern Caucasus Republic, deprived of any job, any perspective, some of them are going to the rebels, some are going to jihadists, and others are in mass numbers go to Russian towns. There are a lot of these people in Moscow, and their behavior is, to put it softly, well, very assertive. They demonstrate their despise for the Russian culture, their macho superiority, and certainly it irritates these young people. And these young people who assembled on Manezhny Square in Moscow, they are also group of desperados, because these people are children of those who lost during reforms. 20 years have passed since fall of communism and new Yeltsin-Putin kleptocracy installed itself in Russia. And most of the population feel themselves abandoned and losing any perspective. And if fathers somehow reconcile themselves with this situation, these young sons from working class outskirts of Moscow, they feel very angry. And for 10 years, TV government propaganda doing everything in their power to explain them that people who are responsible for their plight are foreigners, Westerners, Americans, people of different nations. It's difficult for them to find many Westerners and Americans in Moscow, but there's a lot of people of different culture from these northern republics. And as a result of this event, these two groups of young desperados from northern Caucasus and plebs from Moscow and other central Russian cities, they just thrown once each against others, and it create a combustible mixture, and this spiral of hostility between different ethnic group in Russian Federation threatens the unity, the integrity, territorial integrity, and even the existence of Russia. Well, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was very simple way to solve the problem, because the problem was only Chechnya, who traditionally for centuries have been fighting for independence. And the simplest solution was to give him the kind of independence they're aspiring for. after all, we did it because Kadyrov now enjoying more independence than Dudayev or Maskadov could dream of. But it's too late. It's too late. Neither Kadyrov Chechnya nor this other republic, they don't want to separate from Russia. They exploit Russia. They exist, this corrupt elite of this country, they exist at the expense of Russian budget transfers. And the youngsters, young generation of this republic, they're ambitious. They don't want to separate of Russia. They want to penetrate into Russia and take uppercut inside Russia. And our leaders understand it. Our leaders understand it. And why Putin try immediately to convince us that it's not Chechnya? Because he was afraid to irritate Kadyrov. The paradox, the shame of Russian situation after these 15 years of war in Caucasus, that now Putin depends on Kadyrov more than Kadyrov depends on Putin. And the third and last statement of Mr. Putin, he did it yesterday at the meeting with the leaders of First Channel. He was asked why our security are less efficient in preventing terrorist attack than, for example, in the United States and in Israel. And he tried to somehow to diminish the successes of United States and Israel and to prop up his own anti-terrorist activity. And he made terrible for him and for Russia, by the way, revelation. He said, oh, for them, it's external problem. It's external problem. Israel may put the fence, America borders with Canada and Mexico. It's external problem. For us, it's internal problem. He confessed that he created by his imbecile policy the internal pool of jihad on the territory of the Russian Federation. And I think it's the most convincing sentence to 10 years of his life.
Okay, I will take questions for both of us from the audience. Alec? Well, Alec, wait a second. Someone's going to bring you. We're going to bring the microphone. Doesn't work?
Yes. My name is Alex Goldfarb. When Putin spoke about not talking to terrorists, what he apparently had in mind is the leaders of separatists, whom he essentially diminished to almost non-existent. These people are exiled, but they're still very much on the mind of the Russian authorities. For example, just last week, the Russian Foreign Ministry protested to the United States about an event that the former foreign minister of the separatist government had here in Washington. Ilyas Akhmadov, he has a political asylum in the United States. So my question is, it appears that the North Caucasus is essentially lost to radical Islam. And what is the policy choice for the United States? To support a Russian policy of popping up corrupt governments there, or to abandon the region to the radical Islam, or in your opinion there is still hope that the pro-Western secular separatist leaders like Zakayev or Akhmadov would return once Russia withdraw into the vacuum?
Andrei, do you want to start? I'll respond after you.
Well, first of all, it's academic question. Americans, well, the events which are evolving now before our eyes in Egypt are challenging the same question. All Americans commentate and expert to answer the same question, and they give different theory, different answers. But the truth is that not very much depends on American policy in the field in Egypt, and it's in Egypt where American is spending $1.5 billion of military aid. I have very good personal contacts with many military officers. So I don't think that the dimension of events in North Caucasus is such that it's difficult to imagine that the most constructive policy of United States may somehow influence it either positively or negatively. The real question is how long will Putin regime last, because this regime will just can't change this policy, and I hope that these three looks into Putin, so I illustrated it's enough. And the second, what the next government of national salvation in Russia can do about it, if it's not be too late. I must repeat you that just to give separation is not a solution in this situation. It's very difficult, a tragic problem of Russia itself, and I don't think that either United States or West in general may be somehow constructive in addressing this problem.
I would like to add that I would like to be a tiny bit more optimistic. I'm not sure if there's any basis for optimism. It's more a question of what I would like to be. I think one thing is clear, that the policy of of summary executions and abductions is not going to make the terrorist threat go away. On the contrary, it's going to increase it. So there is a role for American pressure on that front. There are thousands of people who are being abducted in Dagestan, Ingushetia. There were thousands who were abducted in Chechnya. And certainly that's something that is counterproductive for Russia and for the United States. There are areas in which some forms of American pressure could be brought to bear, and they may I persist in thinking that the mentality of the region is not really compatible with this kind of apocalyptic Al-Qaeda type of terrorism, and that under certain circumstances there may be avenues for America to influence the situation there. But it really, we have those possibilities are very few, and I can't say with any confidence that they would be sufficient to really change the direction of the situation. Now, other questions, Sam?
Putin in particular's response very interesting. There was another response to the Russian government immediately after that was to criticize the operating company of Amidst. It struck me as a very small response to the government. In view of some of the fairly significant actions the Russian government has taken to change the ownership of various companies inside the country? Has there been any change in the management or and it's entirely conspiratorial to assume that perhaps there's a bit.
Well, I don't exclude, especially, I don't exclude this scenario, especially after so-called President Medvedev was so insistent and persistent in his attack on Domodedovo airport management. But frankly, I'm even not interested in it, because, well, if it's so, it's another example of complete corruption of Russian authority. But the real problems, the problems which David and myself discuss, are much more serious and dangerous for Russia than battle for the ownership of Domodedovo airport.
Although that would be sadly typical. That would be sadly typical. I mean, it's very much in the same spirit of raising the prices on the cab fares for the survivors to get back to Moscow. Are there other questions?
May I make one comment? Well, to Alex's question, maybe follow up. You are concerned, Alex, what America can do for Russia and Northern Caucasus. And I tell you what people in Kremlin are dreaming now of watching events in Egypt. You may just about it reading the bloggers of Kremlin side. They are dreaming about, well, about victory of Islamic fundamentalists, about victory of Muslim brothers. The people who are attacked by Islamic fundamentalists, they're dreaming about it on three reasons. First, it hurt America, and it's very important. Second, and it's already evolving. Oil prices. Oil prices go up and may save for several more years our petroeconomic. And the third reason, also, it will give him the wonderful argument for the country, for internal politics of Russia. So you see what democracy may bring. The choice, either we power or some fascists, some fundamentalists, and so on. All revolutions, they say, will bring. All these three motivations are evidently contradictory, but all this foreign policy mentality is completely schizophrenic. Oh, and by the way, it's very interesting, this third statement of Putin, that it's our internal problem, not external. You remember his infamous statement after Beslan. After Beslan, he said, comrades, it's not Islamic terrorists. They are just instrument. They are instrument in the hands of more powerful, more traditional enemies of Russia, West and United States, and so on. So all these things are in very peculiar way combines in minds of our leaders.
I think Miriam, you had a question.
It's Miriam Lance, NAD. I wanted, Andre said that questions about democracy for Q&A. I perceive also in Russia a kind of feeling that stability has become stagnation, and I think I'm quoting Primakov when I'm saying that there's this kind of feeling in the Russian elite that the system is no longer working for them, and that was evident in the fires and in the way that the North Caucasus problem seems intractable, and other issues. And there's a kind of sense that we're almost in a 1988, that the elite is very much aware that the way government functions can't resolve its problems. They can't solve terrorism Putin has to put out fires personally because there's no firefighting capacity and so forth. There's, do you feel a sense of that? There were another comment on the Medvedev that you saw people also tweeting, blogging quite often was, oh yeah, the election season has begun. And David spoke about the election season in '99 and how the bombings were certainly seen as part of that. Do you see any perspectives in the election season in an elite who, after the fire, after the Manya, wants to actually change things, or kind of careful suppression?
I was fascinated by the fact that a poll in Moskovsky Komsomolets found that 47% of the respondents thought that the security services were responsible for the attack on Domodedovo. Apropos to your remark, Miriam, about the election season beginning, I personally have no convincing information that the members of the ruling circle in Russia are fed up with Putin, or that they're tired of him, or that they're ready to break with him. I've never believed that there's any real conflict between Putin and Medvedev, or that there is in fact a real difference between them. I think that people who make those remarks are too inclined to take words seriously. They don't understand a culture in which words don't really mean very much, like legal nihilism. Medvedev is against legal nihilism, but he's in favor of the sentence of Khodorkovsky. He's in favor of the murder of Magnitsky. He's in favor of corruption in Gazprom, where 6% of the shares disappeared when he was in charge. So I think that the real question is, so I think for that reason, I don't believe that there's the kind of political possibility for political competition that would motivate the security services to plan this type of event. However, their participation in a whole series of terrorist acts, not just the apartment bombings, but the attack on the theater at Dubrovka and the Beslan school massacre, indicates that their agents and their provocateurs are involved in more than one terrorist group. And under those circumstances, and given the total cynicism, we cannot completely rule out that there are elements who could seek to profit from a terrorist act, might close their eyes to preparations for a terrorist act, might allow certain things to go ahead that they should have stopped, might have engaged in risky behavior, planning the kind of provocation that inevitably would cost lives, and fully aware that they're running the risk that it could get out of hand. All of those things are possible. As for this attack and this political situation right now, intuitively it doesn't seem to me that this is what's involved. I can understand the response of the bloggers. Certainly there's a basis for that. But the issue, I think, in this particular event, and of course I'm ready to be shown that I'm wrong, but my intuition tells me that right now it's the kind of black terrorism that this regime has fostered within Russia's own borders, which is now wreaking havoc on the country and is going to do so more in the future.
Well, I categorically disagree with David's statement that there is no difference between Putin and Medvedev. The difference is considerable, and it's best formulated by a very popular joke in Moscow. We have two leaders. One is an animal, and another is a vegetable. As for Miriam question, you're absolutely right. The feeling in Moscow, it's not 1988, it's February 1917 and July 1991. In 17, nobody believed in Tsarism, beginning with Grand Duke. And 91, nobody believed in communism, beginning from members of Politburo. And now no one in this country believes in Putinism, or maybe with one exception, Putin himself, maybe. But there is a huge difference. It will not provoke perestroika or elite revolution, because this elite is very different from elite of Tsarist or communist. They know, communist nomenclature had its project. Their project was abandon communism and enrich themselves during privatization, and they fulfill this project. And the people who now rule us, they are practically the same nomenclature. They understand this system lost all drive, all energy, that there is no hope for Russia inside the system, but they never rebel against Putin because they're bound by a single chain. They all personally involved in huge institutional corruption. If Putin will be disposed in several days, he will be imprisoned, because everybody knew all the story of Pushkov, but it was a forbidden subject. Everybody knows about Gunvor, about Milhouse, about all Putin friends, about $80 billion channel from Gazprom. But the day first deposing of Putin, the day second imprisonment of Putin. But the problem for the elite is that the day third will be imprisonment of all of them, because all of them first participated in this pillage of country, and all of them are billionaires. They don't want to risk all they now have for the sake of some modernization of.
Okay, Oleg, and then Kurt, and I don't know you, but you be third person. Okay, Paul.
Just a remark relevant to the discussion. 3 days ago, Russia, let's put it this way, marked the 80th anniversary of President Yeltsin's birthday. And there were a lot of television shows, and I have a habit of watching Russian television channels, different. This time I watched several, and of course some praised Yeltsin to the skies, some would, note his flaws and sort of errors. But I want to, for the record, it's not something which is private, it's on the public domain, but few people know about it. Just a few months before he died, Yeltsin was interviewed by one of the Russian media organizations. And he was asked the question, well, Mr. President, now, I mean, former president at that time, now as you look back at your career, what major errors of judgment or mistakes you made? And he said, and I quote, well, I made quite a few, but perhaps the most, critical ones, literally something I regret so much about, is the war in Chechnya and the choice of my successor. That's for your perspective. On public domain, some of you may. Well, you know who the successor is, of course.
Yeah. Okay, Kurt, and then
Cool.
I'm not sure if this is was covered by the topic that you all were challenged to deliver on, but could you look into the future a little bit and predict where this ugly beast that is growing out of North Caucasus and growing out of the institutional corruption of Russia is lurching. We've seen a bomb go up in an airport. That strikes me as being a prelude rather than something in and of itself. We've talked about the processes and the degradation and the history that led to it. But I was wondering if you all, with your perception, might be willing to look at what might be the next stages of this disease.
Do you want to go first?
I would prefer not to speculate on this subject. It may look as giving advices for terrorists.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's every indication that the situation will get worse. Does
Well, just very short. Sochi Olympic Games certainly will be the next one.
and they have not reached the limits of their ability to create chaos in Russia. These are Russian citizens; they can travel freely. Well, there's a very, very large Muslim population in Russia, but so far, the extremism has been concentrated in those areas where there's been a war, in effect in the North Caucasus. In those areas where no war was fought, in the Volga and other parts of Russia, there may be individual terrorists, there may be individual Islamists, but an Islamist movement is, and especially an Islamist terrorist movement, is not visible, which is an indication of what might have happened in the North Caucasus had
Very good point.
as Oleg Kalugin points out, Yeltsin not made that regrettable mistake. Yes, please. You wanted to speak as well. Yeah, this gentleman here.
Yeah, Joel Shapiro. I'm from National Defense Intelligence. A couple of questions that I'm going to make. The sense I got was you're making the argument I'm hearing. We're getting a lot of radical Islam coming from the impression also is most people are inclined to what you meant to say, because my sense is that yes, there are radical Islamists. Most of the population rather not support the Russian push to a great. I think I think I tried to say everyone there has turned to radicalism, prejudge the situation and make the situation. Second, the market issue that Putin has done for power is going to government. No opportunity to create not semi improve one of the things we in the room please walk. One of the issues is no it is the bottom line, very mixed bag. Wrong. The other one,
Well, maybe they do see, maybe they just see and don't care. I never meant to. I didn't suggest, and don't mean to suggest, that the entire North Caucasus is supporting Islamic radicalism. In fact, this radicalism is very contrary to the traditions of the region, and unfortunately, it doesn't take a huge number of people to create a terrorist threat, and the policies that are being employed there are causing that threat to increase. It doesn't mean that the population as a whole is behind it. That's one thing. The other thing is that the appointment of governors was announced after the Beslan school massacre, but in fact, and it was said to be an anti-terrorist measure. It's kind of amusing to me that Russia loves to call itself the Russian Federation. I can't imagine a federation where you appoint the governor, where the president appoints the governors. But in any case, the whole thrust of Russian policy has been exactly the opposite. It's been to put people in charge in the North Caucasus who will. Who are free to be as corrupt as they like, as long as they maintain order in any way that they see fit. And the result, of course, is the increasing terrorist threat, because persons who are victimized and their relatives then or who fear that they will be abducted and shot, summarily executed, realize that joining the terrorists and the insurgents is one of their options. And as far as the Russian people getting fed up and so on, they're long ago fed up. But on the other hand, Putin and Medvedev, and Putin in particular, has been able to play on very primitive instincts in Russia, very primitive nationalist instincts, and to use those to his advantage. During the communist period, one of the great problems was that the average Soviet citizen was very ill-equipped to see the sources of his problems. He didn't, and it was easy to blame those problems on corrupt local officials. And Russian officials have traditionally mastered this art of avoiding responsibility at high levels by blaming local officials. In any case, I'm sorry, we missed you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I'll sit down since I've got to go to my lap. Paul Murphy is my name. I'm the author of Wolves of Islam, Chechen in the Faces of Russia in the Faces of Chechen War, and also Allah's Angels, Chechen Women in War. And of the two people sitting at that desk, I know one lives in Russia. Have you been to Russia or lived in Russia?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
How many times have you been to Russia?
I suggest you check that out.
Well, no, I'm just asking you to take 1 second to answer.
Quite extensively, let's put it that way.
Well, I can speak from experience because I lived there for 10 years. In fact, I lived there during the apartment building bombings in 1999. And I've got several questions that you can write down and answer them in order, but
well,
I don't have enough time to go over everything. But just let me say that I'm sitting here very uncomfortable from what I'm hearing today, because all I'm hearing is that Putin is guilty for everything. Putin's innovative za все. Problem. And that's just not so. That's just not so.
Make sure
Secondly,
that you can give us
question.
Give us questions.
I just asked the question. Is Putin guilty for everything? That's one. Second question, you made the comment about the taxi drivers. Yes, I know that happened. But have you taken a taxi from any airport in Moscow?
That's the second question. We'll
Okay.
give you one more.
The question regarding the taxi is that I'm not surprised they charge 20,000 rubles if they're private taxi drivers, but you didn't make the comment about so many private drivers coming from the center of Moscow and going out to Domodedovo and transporting people. So that says something about Russian society as well, doesn't it?
And your third question?
And the third question is, how in the world can you possibly sit up there and profess to be an expert on Chechnya or Dubrovka or Russia and say that the FS planned and carried out or even had some responsibility for the attack on Dubrovka on the 23rd of October, 2002? Would you tell me the evidence? Because I've researched that. I've talked to people. I've talked to everybody. I've talked to the Chechen side. I've talked to the other side, and I can't find any evidence of that at all.
All right.
So
good.
that's the
we
most
have,
important
all right,
question.
Let's all right. Well, Andre, do you want to start? I can answer a bit too.
Well, as for Dubrovka, as if you studied this issue, you know, you mean the theater, not. You know very well that there were at least one FSB provocator among terrorists. He gave then interview to Novaya Gazeta. It's well known, and he disappeared after he survived the attack. He gave interview to Novaya Gazeta, then disappeared and was killed in Caucasus several months later. It's well-established fact, and certainly you should know it. And this fact is it's already enough to have very, very suspicion about all these affairs. Then the fact number two, it's also very strange why all terrorists were, and especially these women with bombs were killed, and why they did not defuse their bombs. There are a lot of questions about Dubrovka, at least to raise doubts about official version.
You know, Andre, there's also the fact that there was an FSB agent in the audience who all of the bombs that the terrorists strung around the theater were disarmed and incapable of exploding. And there was an FSB agent who was one of the spectators, and he was in regular phone contact by mobile phone with the FSB. He would have been aware that those bombs were incapable of being detonated. The other thing is that, and particularly suspicious, is the fact that with the terrorists unconscious from the gas that was introduced into the theater, they were simply massacred. They were valuable sources of information if the FSB was interested in information. The other thing is, how was it possible there were reports received by the FSB before the terrorist attack took place that a small army of heavily armed Chechens was gathering in the Russian capital. Why is it that no extraordinary measures were made to find them and to prevent this from taking place? Is it even possible for that kind of an operation to be mounted without it being known in advance to the FSB? No, I think we're going to let someone else. No, yeah, you can respond in writing. Go. Yeah.
Alexander Milikishvili, Georgian Service of Voice of America.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. Very informative. I have a question that is related to the Domodedovo attack in an indirect manner.
Yeah.
There is a belated realization on the part of the Russian government that something has to be done about improving socioeconomic conditions in North Caucasus. However, the approach is really harebrained. There is a talk about 5 winter resorts, spending something to the tune of $15 billion, which I'm not sure if there is money of that magnitude. Can you explain why the approach of the Russian government to this essential problem of improving socioeconomic conditions is so dilettante, amateur, and harebrained? Thank you.
Andrei, do you want to answer?
It's the question to Mr. Medvedev and Putin. It's not but exception. It's the approach to all problems. The leaders of very low. Well, Medvedev is terrible. It's just, well, you know, I respect. I don't like Putin very much, but I respect him more than Medvedev. Excuse me for such maybe impoliteness. From my view, Medvedev is a simply idiot, and not only idiot, he's a moral idiot. I illustrated by his behavior in Davos. He made two famous statements. The first one, he invited Western capitals to invest in downhill skiing resorts in Northern Caucasus. And the second, the most outrageous statement was that he said the main purpose of terrorists was to prevent my coming here to Davos, and they failed. It's just insult to the 35 people dead and 100 injured. He's nobody.
I would. We have 5 more minutes. So, if those who would like to ask questions, we'll just keep them short. Go ahead.
This is a rather academic question with regard to terrorist threat. Way of thinking. Thank you. I have a rather academic question about the terrorist threat and the way of thinking about it. Whether it's Domodedovo or Spain or London, Washington, I think that the same thing might apply. If you think of it in terms of two different paradigms, one, the terrorist threat is from an organization, or it's organized. If that's the case, then there are policies, procedures, communications, directives, and so forth that lend themselves to analysis and to intelligence information so that they can be detected and dealt with. On the other side of the paradigm, if it is not an organization, but it is rather some sort of a social movement where people are being induced to believe in certain concepts, certain ideas, in that case, the terrorist threat becomes one in which individuals or small groups independently use personal resources they might get in a public venue to do these attacks. Is it helpful to distinguish between the potential organization and how that lends itself to being able to be dealt with versus the psychological movement that induces the terrorists to commit individual acts?
It's combination of both, because fundamentally, of course, it's as a network of individual cells inspired by the common ideology and using the same method. But this network is global, and some cells, individual cells of this network may grow in a kind similar to the first type of organization you just described. Some they are JAMA, you know. After Domodedovo attack, there were a lot of talk about so-called Nagansky JAMA. Well, it's a very adaptive structure which evaluates, which evolution of counter terrorism tactics and strategy and combined advantages of both types of organization.
Okay, this will be Andrei. You'll be our last questioner. Andrei Larionov. Because with that's it. Our time has elapsed.
Just one observation and one question. One observation is there was a lot of discussion today about Islamic terrorism and Islamic-based violence. Not much has been said about the dramatic shift in the mentality of the substantial portion of the Russian population, shift to violence and shift to use physical force for solutions instead of political or peaceful solutions. I would just mention very well-known fact that the so-called Far Eastern partisans that last summer just physically tried to kill as many policemen as possible. It was never in the mentality of the Russian population for the last almost 20% since the war. In such scale for several generations. And the other example that Andrei Finkovsky has mentioned several times in his writings, it's a first-time public discussion in Moscow in so-called palaces in Rublyovka that the only solution to the current political crisis is physical elimination of the leader, which never happened before. So my observation. Now my question: could you please both, David and Andrei, try not to advise the U.S. government and Russian opposition what to do in Russia at this moment, but could you please try to speculate what would happen in the, let's say, coming months in the country?
All right, I will try to answer very briefly. I think we had I think that the riots in the Manezh Ploshchad are a very ominous indication of this sliding into violence in Russia, because Andrei spoke about some of the motivation, but it's also the fact that the whole psychology of the Putin youth groups is based on a division between us and them. It's not an accident that the largest or best known such group is called ours, or our guys, Nashi. And of course, given the aggressivity against the outside world that the regime uses to defend itself, it would be the easiest thing in the world for them now to use this terrorist threat and the terrorist attacks to ratchet up the level of aggression even higher. So the prospects for the future among the Russian population are very worrying.
Well, I continue my answer to Marshavanskaya question. I thought that the state of our political system is such that any responsible elite in this situation are undertaking perestroika and disposing of the so-called national leader. Even communist system inside its own structure was able to do this local perestroika, disposing successfully of Lenin, of Stalin, of Khrushchev, of Gorbachev, and so on. So even communist nomenclature have some sense of historical responsibility. This nomenclature, this kleptocracy, including all Putin's, Medvedev's, and others, is, to my view, the worst, most corrupted, most anti-national, most irresponsible and disgusting so-called elite in the history of Russia. They will never be ready to do a necessary arrangement. This means that this arrangement will be made in different ways, either by some spontaneous mass violence, or maybe by individual acts of violence. My intuition tells me that it will happen not in this year, and the immediate in the immediate future they pass through this 2011-2012 transfer. All talks, popular talks in the West about election is absolutely irrelevant, because election had already took place. The Putin brigade will stay until next year, and it doesn't important whether animal or vegetable will be formally named as the president of the country. There are some advantages for the system in a vegetable option, and Putin is a smart man, and he may continue his rule of the country in the same way. Because it's final remark, because Medvedev is very instrumental for Putin. He paralyzing potential revolt of liberal part of nomenclatura, generating false illusions. But recently, it's my final remark, I discovered that he is also instrumental in paralyzing potential revolt of nationalist elite. I read one of Zavtra and other similar papers, and their reasoning there, oh, Putin is terrible, Putin is anti-national leader, Putin is a thief, but we should rally up around Putin, because alternative to Putin is pro-American mentality.
All right, well, with that, I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and